But at some point, the math is the math.
I think we can do a better job using that information.
It reinforces my belief that I have the best constituents. Hello, District 6. Hello, Clawback viewers. Welcome to episode 8. Doing a little earlier this morning. I've got afternoon events and meetings that I've got to attend, so excuse the morning Clawback. Normally we try to do these on Friday afternoon. So we might make this one pretty quick. A couple of updates that I think are pretty interesting. We talked a lot about the elections that were held just this Tuesday, the midterm, off-cycle, constitutional amendments and ballot propositions. I want to thank everybody in Austin for keeping your head clear and your eyes open on City Props A and B. Both of those failed to pass. So that's great news for our parks. It's great news for our youth sports leagues and our recreation sports leagues. It's great news for a hopeful future YMCA project in District 6. All of that was related to Prop A. It's also great news for the tourism industry and the convention center and music and art and even homelessness, all of which is connected to the expansion of the convention center. Now the voters very clearly saying, you know what, this is why we have a council. This is what we elect them to do. Now we can move forward on the convention center, which was, of course, approved unanimously by this council. But I think it's a good lesson. These two were the fourth and fifth ballot propositions in the last 4 years, right? It was the Uber and Lyft one first. That one failed. And then there was Props J and K last year. Those both failed. Now Props A and B this year. Those both failed. I mean, it seems very clear that the signature threshold in order to put these items on the ballot is far too low. It is the lowest of any city in the state of Texas. And we are the only city in the state of Texas that keeps defeating these items. There have been ballot propositions in other cities, most recently Houston and San Antonio, most of which passed, but not all, but they have significantly higher signature thresholds. And I think that's really important for us to consider as a city moving forward. It's also really important for you to consider when you're being presented with a petition. Don't just trust what you're being told, really read it. And if you're not sure, don't sign it. It really distracts the work of the city. It costs a lot of money to put on these petitions, both from the city to hold an election, but also just in the organizing and the promotion and all of the things that you have to do when you're educating the voters. So thank you, Austin, once again, being smart about City Props A and B, and just be careful when you're out there being presented with petitions. Let's go. Oh, I forgot to put up my topics. That was my first topic. Election update. Homelessness, there's a lot of work from the state that's happened this week and an interesting announcement from the chamber. There's been kind of an initial cleanup of some overpasses by state officials, but there's just really still this open question about the long-term solution. I spoke to some of the media earlier this week about it, and I think, this homeless problem is really what we've all been saying requires everyone at the table. It requires solutions from all sides, but it requires more than temporary solutions. And even the governor and the chamber have acknowledged that the solutions that they're proposing are temporary. And that might be a great partnership. It might be great for the state and the chamber to come in kind of without having to go through a big public process that the city would have had to gone through. Without having to do budget amendments or having to do public hearings or all of the type of stuff that can sometimes make government decisions more lengthy or challenging. Maybe that is the right way to go for the temporary solutions, and that way they can get on the ground more quickly than the city would have been legally allowed to do otherwise. And it allows the city to focus on the more permanent long-term solutions, one where we are going to want to have those public hearings and we are going to want to have that conversation. So this might actually work. But I think it's important that we not get distracted by partisan infighting or other general infighting when we're actually working on this and try to do it in partnership. There's a lot of money being spent. We don't know how much the governor is spending. Of course, I assume those numbers will come out later. He's not required to release those numbers now. There hasn't been any conversation that I'm aware of with the neighborhood that is behind the property on South 183 that the governor is using for a temporary campsite. The Chamber's temporary site, which I think is going to hold 300 or so folks. I don't know that they've located a site for that yet either. The costs are pretty high. The Chamber announcement was $14 million for 2 years. And if you're holding 300 people, that's $40,000, $46,000 per person. These solutions, even when done by the private sector, are not cheap. I can remember, it was just a month ago that I think people were mad that there were some reports the city was going to spend $20,000 per person experiencing homelessness. And if we're really smart about it, that number is actually a lot less. And that includes housing and support and caseworkers and mental health and all the things. You can actually do this. And I choose to believe that we're all actually trying to get this done in the right way. But the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see how these temporary solutions look a month or two from now. I hope that they work. And I hope that it gives the space for the city to really stand up the permanent solutions that we need. There's a longer version of this conversation, but ultimately you do need these kind of temporary triage shelters, kind of a 30-day space where folks can go and get an assessment and connect to a caseworker. And in some cases, they'll get connected with other benefits they weren't getting. There was one veteran who was homeless, but he had just not filled out his VA paperwork correctly. And so helping them connect to those benefits can be obviously a very cost-effective way for the city to handle it. But also getting folks connected with relatives or family. All of that stuff can start in a 30-day shelter, and then you have more of a housing first, but more of a transitionary housing, like a 6-month shelter. And we have a few of those, and we're working on building those. But then ultimately, you need a solution after the 6 months is up. You need permanent supportive housing. And I think we generally, as a community, agree that we need all these things. Much of this debate has been the sequence in which we implement them. So if the governor and the chamber and the business community is really committed to solving the triage shelter piece of the pyramid, then we can continue as a city to focus on the 6-month and more permanent shelter solutions and permanent housing solutions that we need to actually address the problem. So I think that's going to be a good thing, I hope, if we all stay focused on it being a good thing. And that's what's going to be really hard. If we allow this fight to become a finger-pointing exercise or who did it better or who did it worse, and that is not in one direction, right? Those are conversations being had in both directions, and we might kind of miss the forest for the trees and really delay solutions that can come faster. I hope the city is able to implement some of the things that have been rumored, and purchasing hotels and other types of ideas. All that stuff could be good. But when you're the city and you're not the private sector and you're not the governor, there's just government procurement process and bureaucracy that has been set up, sometimes by the state, sometimes by the city charter. And it just takes a little bit of time for the city to implement a solution. So I think months from now, we'll see even more stuff underway. Ultimately, we're getting to a good place as a community. And I think that's what's important to stay focused on. The Land Dev Code, I've been doing these as a special segment, but I think I just want to quickly hit one thing today. Let me pull up the zoning code. I think y'all can see it. Yeah. So we've covered the residential house scale zones. Those are the R zones. Most of the city has an R zone. Most of the city has an R2 zone. Most of District 6 is R2A. So it's single family zoning. It can allow duplexes in the case that somebody is redeveloping their site, but it doesn't overturn deed restrictions. And it doesn't overturn market forces, frankly. You're not going to see a big swath of teardowns and redevelopments in District 6 neighborhoods, even constructed 20 years ago. Where the teardowns really is when houses have become dilapidated to the point that renovations is more expensive than teardown. And you're just not really going to see that in District 6. The other thing about the deed restrictions, there's been a little bit of contretemps about how deed restrictions are enforced and whose job it is to do so. The city is not set up to enforce deed restrictions. That's in the same way that the city doesn't enforce private contracts. That's what judges and courts are for. But there's an interesting twist to deed restrictions because there's not just that as an adjudication moment. There's also when you go to sell a property. Those deed restrictions can be a mark on the title, which will really prohibit any market actor from trying to go find houses in District 6 to tear down and turn into duplexes where deed restrictions exist. All that stuff's going to be caught up in in land transactions and title clearance and all of those things. So it is really not going to be this wrecking ball scenario that you're going to hear or you may have heard as a nightmare. None of that is true. This is just right-sizing zoning to what a modern city does. But I did want to talk about mixed-use zones. One of the biggest changes in the map is when you see a site that was zoned commercial turned into a mixed use. And we've basically done that all across the city. We want to allow more places for housing to be built. And I think some of the best opportunities in District 6 and in the more suburban areas is where we have these kind of old strip malls with the parking lots that are never really full, at least some of them. Unless you're Kirby Lane, you probably aren't filling up the parking lot. At least that's been my personal experience. But that doesn't mean that what's in the map is precisely the right way we want to have all these zones zoned. So I just want to show some of the definitions. Of course, you have the use tables here that talk about what different types of thing are permitted, what requires staff review, an MUP, minor use permit, what requires a public review, a CUP, conditional use permit, which would go to, in the case of District 6, the Zoning and Platting Commission. In an MUP or a CUP process, they can apply additional rules and restrictions depending on the context sensitivity of the site. So all of that generally takes care of most of the challenging areas that we see. But MU can be kind of a scary zoning. If you look at it and you don't really know what the MU means or what the MU1, 2, 3, or 4 means, it can seem a lot more intense than it really is. Specifically MU1 and MU2, which, as you can see here on MU1, still has a 35-foot height restriction, and on MU2, it's a 40-foot height restriction, which is essentially no different than any of the existing residential zoning that we have in our suburban areas. When you get into MU3, you still have a 40-foot height limitation, but that's when you start getting into affordable housing bonus programs. And then when you get into MU4 and MU5, the heights are more kind of corridor designed to be on major transportation roads. I've seen at least a few examples of where the translation, which was kind of more of a copy and paste translation across the city, maybe has a too intense MU zoning, maybe than it should be. This is the moment that we're going to be making those map corrections. There's also been a lot of rhetoric that what you see in the draft is exactly and perfectly what the council is going to adopt or what the community has accepted. We're not even adopting this thing until February. So it's a great opportunity to reach out, to look on the map. I'm going to show you where the map is again. If you go to austintexas.gov/LDC, and then you see here's at the top, there's the /LDC, code, draft, and map. You scroll down, and there's the proposed zoning map. And I've shown you all this a couple of times. Pulls up, little disclaimer, pulls both the proposed and the current zoning. If we give it a second, it will lay in the zoning map. There it goes, slowly but surely. There are the colors, great. So I'm gonna scroll up. District 6 folks know how far away the district is, to an example that was sent to my office just this week from the Summit Oaks neighborhood. So here's the Summit Oaks neighborhood that is off of 183, and they have a couple of commercial properties that sit in front, to the sides, and to the back of their neighborhood. So obviously a lot of interest in understanding what can be built on those properties. When you click on it, you can see that the current zoning is LO, and the updated proposed zoning MU3. Ultimately, very, very similar, but for the MU allows residential if that's what the property owner decides they want to do. Not that substantially different from LO, but it seems like a substantially different zoning because when we think of mixed use, we think of some of those big apartment complexes with the retail on the ground floor that we've seen in other parts of town. It's not really what most of these MU zones really mean. But that's not to say that there aren't areas where I think, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have that level of intense zoning. You can scroll over to off McNeil, and I'm seeing if I can find the one that I saw the other day. That here's a perfect example where the current zoning is IRR, which means it never really got zoning after annexation, and now it's being tagged with an MU5B. I'm not sure that MU5 is appropriate for McNeil Road. Certainly a site of that size is going to have other constraints on it that will limit what you can get there. But it's a good opportunity to think through as a community what we really want to see. And then the adjoining property still noted as RR also doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's, as I've spoken to staff, there's kind of a hodgepodge zoning. You'll see that kind of throughout District 6 in places because that never really got good zoning to begin with during the annexation process. So this is the right time to really reach out to my office if you see something unusual by your neighborhood or elsewhere in the city and you want us to look into it. Please send that email to my office, District 6, the number 6, at austintexas.gov. And the rest of it, let me go back to the text. So you can see here's all the chapters. I've made my way through about 700 pages of 1,000 pages. Once you get past chapter 3, it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot of technical jargon and just the machinery of how developments work. And a lot of this text definition really applies to larger redevelopments, not as much to smaller redevelopments or infill developments. And that's a lot of the, I think, confusion that we get is, oh, where you're going to have to require A, B, C, and D. And actually, it only really applies in certain cases. Or we leave off other considerations like compatibility rules, which still limit height within 50 or 100 feet of house scale zones. All that stuff is in there. But more importantly, make sure to look at the map. Make sure to go look and see what is actually on the ground. And then if you have any issues, if you have questions, if you think things should be a little different in your neighborhood, please send an email to my office and we will do our best to get back to you. So let's go on. I gotta make that go away. Let's go on from make our titles go away. And we're gonna do our first recurring segment on the Clawback. Yes, this is the very first episode we did, the traffic report, and I just wanted to take an opportunity to do another update on projects that are underway and processes that we're going through as a district. The major stuff is still in process. We've only ever heard good news about timelines and construction schedules. I mean, knowing that something might take a couple of years can be frustrating, but ultimately that is how long it takes to do road projects for a number of reasons. But the first one that we should start seeing the shovels hit the dirt, the Anderson Mill Road project, something I've been working on personally, the community's been very interested in. We should see shovels in the dirt next summer, according to an update from city staff. They've been able to get that project moved even faster than they had originally thought. So that's good news. The next big project that should come after that are the 183 improvements. You'll see express lanes coming down the middle of 183 North, and then you'll see additional fixes to the general purpose lanes. Headed north, the 434 will just be 4 lanes, and headed south, that on-ramp at the curve at Duval that backs traffic all the way up to Leander will have that on-ramp will actually get its own actual lane. So that should make both some major improvements to 183 for regular drivers, but also those express lanes become really important for our commuter service. Those commuter buses have a lot of traffic on them, myself included, when I can make my council schedule work. And getting those buses to a more regular and predictable schedule will make it even more convenient for as many folks as can get out of their cars and into those buses. If we can just get 10 or 15% of the people out of the cars and into the buses, it will make the whole system work a little bit better. It's not really about letting every single person feel like the system works for them. Just as when we do road projects in Far East Austin, it's probably not going to be a road District 6 drives on. But when we think about system improvements, that's really how you have to do it. Then there's smaller stuff that's coming up. We have the quarter cent projects. We're working with neighborhoods all throughout District 6 to identify those small scale projects that have really been missed by the city for many years. This was a program initiated before I was elected, but we've been able to reserve those funds until we could ensure that the Anderson Mill Road project was fully funded. We were able to take some savings from Oak Hill and apply it to Anderson Mill, so we got those funds back into the coffers, and so we can get little projects like crosswalks or some sidewalk repair or maybe a pedestrian crossing, things like that, traffic calming when you have neighborhood speeding, all different types of things. We're getting all that input from neighborhoods. We were at a neighborhood meeting in Davis Spring this week, hearing from the community. We've invited all the neighborhoods to host those meetings if they want to. And then we'll evaluate those ideas through the engineering staff and get those hopefully starting on the ground next year as well. We're going to start seeing a lot of construction, a lot of road and transit and traffic construction projects in our district over the next 3 or 4 years. And I know it will be frustrating. Nobody likes to have to take longer to get where they're going. But if we want to fix the roads, there just has to be a part where we're building them. So I hope everyone keeps that in mind and we keep our wits about us. And when we see road construction, when we see these projects underway, remember that this is about how much better it will be when they're finished, not just about the pain it is when things are under construction. That is just going to be how we get stuff done out here. I think that's enough for today. I'm going to get to the end credits. Here we are. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to the Austin Chronicle for giving me a Best of Austin award this year. The best repurposing of RuPaul's Drag Race quote. That's a pretty cool honor. And also, if you the campaign season is kicked off, we could really use your support. You can go to jimmyflannigan.com and support the campaign as we head into 2020 and get all of these projects done and everything fixed up for District 6 in the city of Austin. Thanks everybody for watching.